Hey, Brett, you're muted.
Thank you. That's right. Whenever you start up, you start mute.
Well, you've helped all of us remember it the entire time. At least I could do.
Okay, Drew, you got it. I was just going to request you to go ahead and put us all back up. And we don't need, I think, to take a break at this time. We can just get started again and see how we're doing. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3. Kohler, hello again. I can't think of anything right now that he said. I'll think about it. If I have anything I can think of, I'll let you know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I think everybody's back. I'm not seeing everybody's faces, but everybody at least has a num up there. So we're out of executive session at this point, and we're going back into our regular session. We're down to just 2 attendees, and one of those is Drew, so I guess we're really low, but anyhow, this is still being recorded. The next item on our agenda was the consideration of the whole power contract, and after our conversation with Matt, if there was any action we needed to take, or if anybody wanted to say anything related to that. But I don't, probably can skip by that, but I'll just ask momentarily, since that's on the agenda, is there anything related to the wholesale power contract that needs to be discussed further in public at this time? All right, I'm going to go on to the next agenda item, which is our attorney's report. Shay, are you back on? Have we notified Shay? The one thing she might know she's next, we've got to think about notifying her.
Yes, I have let her know.
Okay, when she is here, we'll jump to her report. And the other part that we have is we thought this was going to be running late. We're running, it's already after 4 o'clock, so there's no great records being set. But we were hoping that everybody would get a chance to review the direct reports, and rather than going through them one at a time, we'd see if there's any questions. So let's start on questions on the direct reports until we see Shay here, and then we'll go back to her. Do we have any questions on the direct reports, or are there any directors who made a report and there's something that they really specifically wanted to point out? Kirsten, go ahead.
Hey, this is for Kohler. 2 things that came out in your report, either from your own report or from the ones, the meeting summary. One was the Edison Institute, and I'd be interested if you could talk a bit more on that. I'm interested in how they chose that, and if you know anything more about it, or if anybody on the board does. And the second one is about the cost containment committee, or whatever it is that Brad was leading up. Can you shed some more light on either of those? Kohler?
Yeah, Kohler is there, but he looks like he's frozen in time at the moment. Technical difficulties are cropping up. Things have been working so well.
It looks like he's trying again.
Okay, hold that thought. I don't know if Kohler heard it all or not, but I see Shay is here. So Shay, if you're able to, could you go to the attorney report and discuss the highlights there and give us a chance to ask questions?
Yes, sir. The report is in your packet, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have on the written report itself. The area that I wanted to point out is that I did prepare a memo to the board regarding email communications. And with the start of a new kind of board year with some new board members, I thought it would be a good idea to remind everybody about the concerns over email communications and kind of provide some background and guidelines on how to handle email communications. There's 2 reasons why we need to watch this. One is the concern over statutory requirements, but the other is really to address use of email addresses for LPA only. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, and there is an IT reason also why we need to avoid using personal email communication. And this is something that I talked over with Drew and kind of included some of his concerns regarding protecting LPA board communications. And he's able to do that if you utilize your LPA email addresses. He can't do that if you utilize your personal email addresses. So going forward this year, we are asking that the board really focus on using LPA emails for LPA business and avoid sending emails through your personal email addresses for anything that is LPA related. And so, oh, and then the last thing that I wanted to point out is that the Election Supervisory Committee did meet, and we've got the final report to the board, and I included those minutes as part of my attorney's report. So I'm happy to answer questions on any of those 3 issues.
Okay, and just one point of clarification on using the LPA Board of Directors email is that, as I understand it, just goes to the 12 Board of Directors and not to any staff or to Shay. Shay, do you get those emails if it's just a Board of Directors?
No, I'm not on that email list. And so if you did put on, if you use the LPA group email, LPA directors, it just goes to the directors, and I don't see that.
All right, so if any of us use that and would like to make Shay part of that, or would like to keep it confidential for some reason, make sure and copy Shay on that and put in, this is confidential email, something like that somewhere in the line. And if you wish to reach out to Jessica, or sometimes email I send, I want Carl to be aware of it, you have to specifically copy them on the Board of Directors email. Otherwise, I encourage us to make good use of that Board of Directors email. Drew, is everything we said there correct as far as you know?
Yes, I just wanted to be real clear on that, that the Board of Directors distribution group only goes to the Board of Directors. There's no staff or anybody else that gets included in that.
Unless we choose that to happen. Okay, that sounds real good. Rachel, you've got a question, if you would go ahead.
Yeah, I asked this just because this might be pertinent to others. So Drew, I know part of the reason why I forward my LPA emails to my Gmail, because I do not use, every day I'm stuck on this computer for like 16 hours, and I don't go to my iPad unless I'm on a board meeting. Is there a way, I've tried to do this, but I cannot figure it out. I'm not tech savvy enough. Can you help me get the LPA email on my actual physical work computer?
Yes, that is something we've made improvements in, and we can address. We will want to set up 2-factor authentication for any devices that you want to access that LPA email, but absolutely we can set you up with that.
Okay, thanks. I'll put in a request.
And Rachel, the way I typically do that, I use on my desktop computer a program called Thunderbird, and I have 2 identities with that program. So I can use the same program and see both LPA as LPA and see my other as my other. And then if I'm on something else, I can go to the website to look at the Outlook email, but I admit that's much more cumbersome. So there are some ways about it, and I'd encourage you to work with Drew to explore those. I don't know what your typical mail program is, but it might have the way so that you can have 2 identities at the same time, which is convenient. Okay, Kirsten, if you would go ahead.
Yeah, so Drew, the email list that is called Board of Directors, does that only have LPEA.coop addresses in it for the directors?
It does not at this time, but that's the direction we'd like to go. So there are only board members included in that list, but we do have some of your personal email addresses included in there, but that's part of what we're trying to address right now, and would like to take all of those out and only.
Okay, then we need to do that. Do we need to make a motion to make that happen? I mean, if it's an issue, if our lawyer is saying we should do it, shouldn't we do it?
I think until we find out if we can do it gently, we should do it gently. And because I know maybe it won't be as much of a problem as it had been in the past, but in the past, we certainly had some who outright absolutely refused to do that. I don't know if we've got any directors who are still in that situation now, but hopefully with some prod, if we're able to show different directors that they can use both the personal and this email without being too unpleasant and cumbersome, we can get there in a gentle way.
so in a month, I'm going to be bringing it up. And
Okay, I think that's
mandating it.
appropriate. You should bring it up. I was one of those in the past who was not too keen about that, and so I had everything forwarded. But I have learned the light, and I now just have them separated. But at least I'm able to do it conveniently. That's the key. So Drew, and I should direct this to Jessica. Jessica, would you direct Drew to have him gently reach out to all the directors on our board of director email list who aren't using their LPEA.coop email and work with them to see if they can find a way that they could do that conveniently.
I would be happy to. Thank you.
And next month, Drew, if you could give us an update as to how that's going, we would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Be happy to.
Okay, Shay, we've taken a big circuit around from the email, but I think it started with your memo. I think the memo was good. I will try to abide by it. We certainly can't do things that require a vote on email, and we can't try and push other directors to our point of view. The email is to be sharing sort of somewhat opinions, but asking information. Anything where we're trying to encourage other people to vote in a certain way has got to be done in open session, as I understand it. Is that correct?
That's correct. So what you want to do is you want to monitor your emails and police yourself. Whenever you, and it's hard to do, but whenever you find yourself urging somebody to take an action via email, that's where you need to stop. That's what needs to happen in open session, because you need to give the members the opportunity to hear that discussion. If you need information and you're trying to learn something and understand a topic so that you can vote at a board meeting, then that's something that would be appropriate to handle via email. But that's something that all of the board members should watch themselves, try to police yourselves and be conscious of, because it is important for our governance to do this. The other thing is if you have a question, if you have concerns, if you're not sure if this is going over the line, that sort of thing, please include me in the emails and I can help monitor that for you if you need me to.
All right, appreciate it. And while we're on email, the other thing I'd like to request everybody, make sure you understand the difference between reply and reply all. There's a lot of times that,
for a moment.
Pardon me?
Could I interrupt? Kohler when he got technically difficultied or whatever, he went over to attendees, and if Drew could bring him back over, he'd be in session with us.
Yeah, we've
Thank
been
you.
trying to move him over. I don't know what the technicality is. Drew, it only gives me two options: rename or remove.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, appreciate that, John. We need Kohler back here.
I believe that's because he's just on with his phone. So
Kohler, are you able to hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can. Sorry, we lost you there for
Yeah.
a while. We've been having quite an email discussion.
I don't have internet. My internet went completely off, so I'm strictly on the phone. But I can hear you now.
Were you able to hear any of the last 10 minutes or so?
No, I was not.
All right. Well, it was mostly about email, and we're trying our best to use our LPEA.coop email and other
So
discussions.
this is recorded so I can look back at that. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you could find this particular part of it, and so you could see what Shay was advising us on in the discussion, that'd probably be worth your time. So we don't.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. So sorry about the issue.
Okay, and the next point I was going to bring up is the difference between reply and reply all. Now, a lot of times we're sent out information and everybody appreciates it, and we really like what's been done, but the email is just then a thank you or I appreciate that or whatever. And in trying to be conscious of the bandwidth and so much of that sort of minor stuff, that's the kind of stuff that unless you are really going to say more about it in some way, you should just do a reply to the sender and not reply to the entire list, just to cut down on our email. So if you're not familiar with the distinction between reply and reply all, make sure you know how to use that and try and do it in a more appropriate fashion going forward. I hate to be the email police, but we all have our pet peeves. Okay, Kirsten, if you'd go ahead, you're next.
Yes, thank you. So I am fully capable of using education as a blunt tool for So please, if I'm overstepping, let me know. Concerning the discussion and being able to discuss, and sometimes we can get too much into the influencing or trying to influence. Where are we with trying to have some sort of a public forum where we can do this? So can we capture all our emails so they can be seen, so people know what the heck we're talking about the other 30 days of the month?
And this is something that was discussed as being an issue for policy committee to bring up and address. And I have that tagged as a point whenever policy committee gets back up and rolling. So with the board's permission, I would like to kick that to Director Huntington as the new chair of policy committee and try to put that on the agenda for that work.
By the idea then is that we would actually create a policy for what to do with all of our LPA email.
Correct.
Is that, I guess we've all been working toward more transparency. I don't mean to draw lines, but I wonder, do other boards share their interboard email with their members or the public? Would this be something expected, or are we trying to go too far here too fast?
This is something that I'm not aware of any other co-op doing. It's something that Director Skehan brought up as an idea because I believe it's the city of Fountain does this on their end. And so it was an idea that she had to sort of follow what the city of Fountain was doing on that end. I do have some concerns about potential overreach and that sort of thing. And so that's why I wanted an opportunity to discuss it in a detailed fashion, and thought that policy committee would be a good opportunity to have that more detailed discussion to see what lines could be drawn, what options might be available, that sort of thing, given those kind of concerns.
Okay, I feel the tensions in a sense in our elections and stuff may be somewhat going away, but still, we wouldn't want people to be afraid to ask stupid questions via email, that they may be embarrassed if those questions were to be used in an election against them or something. Those are the sort of concerns that I would have if just everything, I want to encourage us to use the email to try and become better directors and not to discourage it. So that's just my concern.
And the other concern that I have in those regards is, if we are exercising good discipline and are not conducting business via email, then that takes away, in my mind, some of the pressure towards the idea of sharing these emails. If it's truly gathering information and understanding a point that is going to be discussed in a board meeting, then it's probably not necessary to try to make those emails available to the public, because that information is going to be made available to the public through the course of the board meeting. So that goes towards that overreach concern that I would like to kind of feel out the boundaries of.
Okay.
All right, Kohler, do you have anything?
I do not.
Okay. All right, then. Shay, is there anything else related to this and your attorney report? Anybody have any questions for Shay?
I don't have anything else specifically I'd like to point out, so happy to take any questions.
Okay. Questions? Don't see any at the moment. I'll look again to see what else is on the agenda. All right, we're back then. No questions for Shay. Thank you, Shay. To director reports, as in your agenda, you notice that we have 5 specific reports. We've asked people to read those reports. And of course, we've asked the people who are writing the reports to do a pretty good job in writing them so that we can capture most of doing that. And I also want to point out one of the concerns with just asking questions on these and not going through them is that our members would never see what's there. And that's yet again another reason why we would have a public board packet, so that the reports that you put would be out on the website for people who wanted to look at them. That all being said, are there any specific questions on these reports? I know Kirsten has one, and I'll let her start. Go ahead. And Kohler, this is for you, by the way, so I hope you can hear. Go ahead, Kirsten.
Hey, Kohler, you were frozen when I asked this question. I don't know if you heard it. In your report, you talked both about the Edison Institute, and that's going to be used to set a carbon base. So it sounds like Tri-State has decided, okay, this is the path we're going to go so that we can compare apples to apples. So I'd like to know if there's any more you have to add to that. And then the second piece was about, the cost containment crew or cost containment committee that's they're forming with Brad.
So can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on the carbon rate, the only thing I'd add, if you look at that issue brief in the fourth paragraph, one of the key things it says is that this is a different methodology from what Tri-State has used in the past. So it is not comparable to emission rates that may have been previously provided. So that's a key point if you're going to compare it to what has been in the past. The other caveat on this is that it might change again. Tri-State is looking for the best way to report this. The feds do not have a good way. Colorado doesn't have a good way. The EPA doesn't have a way. And none of them agree with each other. If something does come up to where there is agreement, then Tri-State will relook at this and say, all right, is this a better way to do it? But for right now, they are using the Edison Electric Institute or the EEI to do that rate, give that carbon rate. And Dan Harms might have some input. I don't know if he's seen that or not, and see how that compares to what we had before. The second part of your question on I think it was related to the cost reduction team that they're putting in there. Is that correct, Kirsten?
Yes, sir.
So they're just putting that together. I don't know too much about it yet, other than what they're trying to do is that one of the biggest issues that members have put forward to Tri-State is you've got to reduce the cost. And so they put this team together. But just as it got started is when we got started in COVID and everything else. And Tri-State right now is in a spot to where I don't know how effective this will be immediately. They cannot apply for the PPP loan or some of these other things like we could, and yet they're getting hit also with reductions of mostly commercial and industrial loads. So they, one of the other things, if you looked in my report, we rescinded a loan we were going to get that you approved in April when you were on the board, and that was for $125 million. And they increased, excuse me, 150, I think. They increased that to $225 million. And the reason why is that they don't want to do a rate increase, but they don't know if they're going to need this cash or not. And money was very, very inexpensive, so that they did borrow that. So there's a lot of moving wheels on this thing, and they're hoping to get this team going as soon as they can to find where they can reduce rates. But right at the moment, I think things are just kind of a little bit too different to do any good. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. I'd like to go back to the first part of my question, which was about the EEI. And you said that it's different than what they have done. When you say it's different than do the numbers now look better, or do they look worse than they did under the old method?
I don't know the answer to that. It does give you a sample in there that it's in that fifth paragraph, and it said, let's see, Tri-State's 2019 carbon rate is estimated at 1,706 pounds per megawatt hour, which is a 9.9 decrease from the 2005 carbon rate of 1,894, estimated using the same methodology. So they had to estimate that. Now, one of the questions that came up is, can we get a rate figure for each year? And the answer to that from 2015 up until today. And the answer to that was not an accurate one, because they didn't have a way to really measure it, and they didn't have this technique. So what they're doing is they're estimating it by financial statements and other things to get this carbon. So I can ask that question, maybe get you a more defined answer on it. But right at the moment, that's the best I can do for an answer for you, Kirsten.
Super. And the flip of that, not only the historical, but would also be, can you use this tool to say, okay, so when we bring on these PPAs in 2022 and 2023, and when we do those other further on plans, what we would expect our carbon to be for those? And can we use that can we use this model as a guesstimate?
That's a good question. I'll ask that. I can't answer that, but I can sure ask it.
Thank you.
And Kirsten,
You bet.
I just sent a write-up that Dan had done on this issue as well. So the whole board should have it in their LPEA emails.
Thank you.
Hey, Joe Lewandowski, would you unmute and go ahead?
And just for John and
Sue, I bet you mean.
Sue, sorry, geez. Just so you know, the Roundup board meets the last Monday of the month. And last month we actually met before the board meeting, so that's why you had the report. Usually, unless there's some kind of a holiday or something, you'll get the report the following the month on the grants. And if you have any other questions about Roundup, send me an email, give me a call or something. I had a few things on Tri-State, and probably for Kohler and maybe Carl and Jessica. I don't know if I was reading this right, but in their report on their April costs, it really jumped out at me. Their electric sales were 6% below budget, but their transmission and power costs were 18.9 billion or 9 million below budget. Their margin was 2.9 million, and they had actually budgeted 9.8 million below budget on that. It just really, unless I was reading it wrong, but it just jumped out at me. I mean, that is a huge spread there in what was budgeted and what they actually showed. I don't know if anyone else looked at that, and I don't need an answer to it now, but I'm just wondering what that means and what it might mean going down the road. It was just kind of astounding. And I have one more question.
That probably was discussed at the meeting. Do you have any input on that, Kohler?
Just got a message on you. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry, I'm having all kinds of problems. So I can't concentrate too much. I did hear most of the questions, but I'm going to have to try to get my iPad to where I can look at it, and I can't get it right now. So I'm sorry.
Kohler, if Carl can help. So Carl now attends the finance committee meetings at Tri-State. And so Carl, I don't know if you have any insight or if they even talked about this at the finance committee.
They did. I can tell you what I heard, Joe, and everyone else. Yes, sales are obviously down significantly, as are ours. It's just a fact of life right now. What Pat Bridges talked about in terms of expenses was that the main takeaway I got was that they had deferred an awful lot of expenses that they would normally be doing at this time of year. Well, April, May, to be more precise. Quite often that's a kind of downtime, especially in coal generation, and that's when you'd be doing a lot of work on plants and so forth. But they're not doing that. One, because there isn't the demand, and two, because they want to postpone the cost. So from what I can tell, they were the last financial report I heard, they were slightly over where they thought they would be in terms of margins. But it's somewhat artificial because they've deferred so many of these costs.
Okay, so it was a little bit of a accounting, not trick, but some shuffling with accounting is what
I wouldn't say that. I think it's just that they thought they would do this maintenance and repairs in April and May, and they're not doing them. They're going to wait till later in the year or possibly even next year.
Okay, thanks. And then the
So
other question, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what they did talk about is they deferred some of these maintenance projects, and these are big projects, and they're just deferring them. They aren't getting rid of them. And it's not any kind of an accounting thing. It's just kind of like what LPA is doing, where we're holding off some of our projects until we get through this COVID, until we get things a little bit more stabilized. And these are big numbers. These are big projects they can hold up. It is not sustainable though. So what's going to happen is you're going to see the opposite when they put this back into effect. When they start doing these projects, then it's going to be in a time in which it wasn't put into the budget. Now it shows up, and it's going to go just the opposite.
Okay, great, thanks. And then on, it was on page 122, they talked about putting together a cost reduction team, and they asked to get input from the co-ops. And Jessica, I was just wondering if that's moved along at all, and do you see good potential for, you know, CEOs or other staff to look at Tri-State and give them an outside view?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this is something I was going to bring up to Dwayne. He has been hosting a once a month town hall with the CEOs, but it's more of an update to the CEOs. All the CREA CEOs have a call every Friday to talk about issues. And this is something that we brought up, that it would be great for Dwayne to hold a just kind of a CEO roundtable sounding board. Most large wholesale providers do that. For example, Bonneville Power did that, where the administrator hosted all the CEOs at a roundtable once a month and just got their feedback. So we haven't approached Dwayne with that yet, but I think with how Dwayne is acting, I think he'd be open to it, quite honestly. So we'll definitely push on that.
Okay, Rachel, you're up next if you'll unmute.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of questions for Kohler on Tri-State. So one, or Dan, perhaps you know this too. So in the carbon accounting under the responsible energy plan, I know there's, or I should back up. I know that there's always been kind of a interesting discrepancy between how I think it's Colorado counts renewable energy. It doesn't count hydro, and then how Tri-State counts renewable, which the energy portfolio, or the new renewable energy plan thing, if the WAPA allocations that Tri-State has will fall under that, or if they're going to be left out of that.
I can maybe hit on that real quick. It's about carbon now, not whether it's classified as renewable and counts towards the renewable portfolio. Now, since it's all about carbon, there's no question about it.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the second was a financial question, and it might just be I'm reading this wrong, but I was looking at the April 2020 financials, and I was looking at their general and administrative expense. And am I reading this correctly that they are, it seems like on average, $1 million over every month? And if that's accurate, does this come up in the board? Is that, I know they have a giant budget, so maybe that's peanuts to them, but it just seems kind of wild.
This is Carl. I'm really having a hard time hearing you, Rachel. It's really getting garbaged up. So I really don't understand your question just because it didn't come through clear.
Yeah, and I was wondering if that was my link going bad, but I guess not. It cut out a couple times. Could you ask again real quick in case it comes through, Rachel, or not? Ooh, you got a bad link.
Oh. Rachel has a bad link?
Okay, go ahead. You're going now. Yeah, it has been cutting out. Yes.
Oh, yeah. You guys, this is why we need to work on broadband.
Yeah.
For real. So I was just asking if I'm reading this correctly and looking at the April 20 financial kind of snapshot that's put on page 123, And just looking at their numbers, it just stood out to me. It appears that their general administrative is almost a quarter over budget. Like it's really high over budget. And I think one of the things we had been wondering as a group is with this FERC, what are some of the costs associated with that? And I don't know, it's just, I feel like G&A is usually pretty stable because it's predictable with salaries and rent and the rest of it. So I just didn't know if that was anything you as a board member, if that's been on the radar, if that's an accurate read on it, and if there's an explanation. It's just curious.
Kohler, were you able to get that? The G&A is about $1 million a month over so far this year.
Yeah, I picked up on her question. I do not have an answer for you, but I will check on that. I do know that their litigation expenses have been high because they're obviously doing the same thing we're doing on the opposite side, and they have a few other fronts. But I can't answer that specifically. I will try to find the answer for you. And I'll tell you one of the things that I really appreciate, Jessica, having Carl attend those financial committee meetings is when we get back into a regular meeting, which will start in August. I do not go to the financial committee meeting because it goes at the same time that my committee meeting goes, the External Affairs Committee. So we're really lost on some of this, and it's really helpful for Carl to be there, in my opinion, because then he can help out with questions. But anyway, Rachel, I will do my best to find out on that. I'm a little bit behind with the first time. I will see what I can find out for you.
Thank you.
We should quit picking on Kohler. Oh my gosh, he's just starting again. Okay. Jack Turner. Jack, will you unmute and go ahead?
Yeah, this is this is CREA that I wanted to highlight, but since all the conversations on Tri-State, I didn't want to disrupt that. So, but I have a CREA highlight to point out. Britt.
Well, go ahead, please. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Britt, could I jump in because I can?
Yeah, I saw Carl there. So okay.
Oh,
sorry,
right.
Jack. I just want to.
Oh, I saw you, Carl.
Yeah, on the G&A costs, Kohler's quite right. Litigation is a major part of it. At the committee meeting, also Pat mentioned they had some. This is a bit of accounting magic, but in the wrong way, unfortunately for them. They have an amortization of some pension costs that was brought up with their previous audit that they had to do differently. I would say, based on what Pat said, it's kind of half and half between those two issues.
Okay. Jack, thank you, Carl. Jack, regarding CREA.
Yeah, and thumbs up, Rachel. Many of us are having connectivity issues today, so I was thinking the same thing as you spoke to about broadband, a niche for us. So thank you. So the one thing I want to highlight is regarding our secrecy sleeve that became part of the cooperative governance that Speaker Becker took on as a sponsor. That bill hasn't even given a name, it didn't even make it to a bill. And with COVID, it probably will be introduced next year. But the interesting thing about it is it morphed into, it did include doing elections electronically, but with COVID, giving us more, talking our language more to give co-ops more flexibility for their annual meetings. So there may be something, and I know we talked earlier about bylaw change, but the state may intervene. But just to highlight that our secrecy sleeve didn't make it to the session this year and probably be introduced next year by Speaker Becker.
Thank you, Jack. And I just would, what was discussed earlier today about the cost of our elections. And I know our elections aren't perhaps as important as federal elections, but the ability to perhaps make them less costly and more electric someday, more digital, would be interesting. It'd be nice to be able to go that direction. Okay, are there any other questions or comments on the board report? We're doing good then. I think we're going to be able to wrap this up. Now, is there any other questions or comments on anything that we've covered today, or can we go ahead and adjourn the meeting? I think I've got it all covered. Rachel, go ahead.
This is just a follow up because I can't remember. I think you and I had talked about this, but I sent out an email. I think sometimes I try to send out emails and they don't go because of my LPA situation, email situation. But I believe after last meeting, I sent out an email just mentioning that with our new board members, it'd be good to revisit our charter and also maybe to look at our strategic goal, just because the state goal has state mandates push beyond their strategic goal and a few things like that. And I believe, just so everyone knows, Britt, you had mentioned we may talk about that, but it would be most likely in a retreat setting, and that will be at some point when COVID allows. Is that an accurate closing the loop on that?
That was my hope that we would be able to do that at some point. However, if this drags on, we're not allowed to get in the same room, although I guess that we're less than 50, we probably will be able to at some point, just have to space out. We could perhaps do something, but yeah, I was hoping that those kind of discussions that we would have during part of a retreat. And my idea was a retreat would be more board interpersonal and interacting between each other rather than just being lectured to. However, we would possibly also have some particular areas of technology or something related to that, perhaps the carbon methodology of counting it would be an example that we would be briefed on. But that was my thought anyhow. Okay. Jack Turner.
Yeah, I don't know if we missed it, Britt, but there was the Finance and Audit Committee, and I apologize. I had connectivity issues there that I wasn't able to join that meeting, but it was in regard to the discussion, and I looked over the slide deck with the partial contract, but there seemed to be a need for, but reading the minutes, it looked like the Finance and Audit Committee went into executive session to discuss something. Is that something that for us that weren't part of that meeting, need to be informed of or brought up to date on that discussion?
And I'm going to let Carl also speak here a minute about a little bit about the proposal, and Dan might be able to, it was part of that too. But basically what it did is, now that the contract committee finished their work and they had a methodology, we were able to plug that methodology into our spreadsheet to look at it our way. And they got in touch with Pat Bridges to be able to pull that data in and create what our savings would be compared to doing nothing. And it was just a report on that. There's no action or recommendation at this time. It was just saying, how does this look? Is this spreadsheet? We've covered the bases. And mostly it was just having Pat online at the same time as the rest of us, just that we weren't missing something big. The executive session was pretty uneventful. It was just some things people wanted to point out, primarily me, and comment on that they were embarrassed to do in front of Pat, in a sense, or in public. So it's just some more discussion about some of that. Carl, would you say anything more about the partial requirements contract spreadsheet that you did, and it's in the board packet for people to look at?
I don't think so, Britt. I think you've covered that. It was really an informational session, and to get Pat to confirm that he thought our assumptions were sound, which he did. So really, I don't think there's much more to say than that, unless Dan feels differently. Dan Harms.
Dan, why don't you speak up and say how's that work going? Is that spreadsheet ready to move ahead when we do get the ALJ number?
Yeah, I think things are looking real good. Somebody mentioned getting our ducks in order. We've been getting those ducks in order for a while, and we are ready to move forward on that. We know, have a good sense and run a lot of sensitivities to know really what works for us, what doesn't. And I think we're going to be well underway once we get a number. Okay, and it's certainly worth everybody to look at those work that they did and those charts, and to try and make sure you understand what those little bars are, and you understand that the white space between the red line and the bars is the annual savings. And then you can take a net present value back of that to get a single number.
So that's looking pretty good. So that we get further information, we can have some strict comparisons to do. Obviously, as Kirsten brought up, there would be a negotiation that might be able to happen, but you have to start from the fact of having some real numbers. And I think we're getting closer to that. Kirsten, you've got your hand up. Would you?
Yes, sir. You said something about saying stuff in executive committee that we might be embarrassed to say otherwise. And seeing as I put my foot in my mouth at least 10 times in a board meeting, I think we have to be cautious though about when we consider something to go into executive session. Just because we're uncomfortable about it is not a reason for it to be an executive session. If it's personnel, if it's client privilege, if it's strategy that involves a competitor, or in this case, another litigant, whatever that word is, then yes, executive session. But we really can't put it as a catch-all because I'm not feeling comfortable. And I know you didn't really mean it.
Yeah, although, and as it turned out, it probably drifted a little bit more toward not needing one than needing one once the initial comments were made. But I think your advice is correct, and we should follow that. You go into executive session when there's a real good reason for it and not otherwise. Okay, other comments? All right, then I think we're in good shape to adjourn this board meeting. So I call it adjourned. Thank you very much. We beat 5 o'clock. That's really good news.
Like a record for my years on
Yay,
this board.
yay, yay, yay. Bye, everybody. Be safe.
Good job.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good job, Britt. Way to go.
You bet.